person's imaginings can be put into books and inspire other imaginings from other people centuries later. A person's imaginings can be expounded upon by people who are not even born when the person first imagined whatever was imagined. Imagination's amazing, and it is a spiritual energy. And so we're going to use the spiritual energy of imagination to create a story called American Apocalypse. And of course, if we're going to talk about apocalypse, what better place than to start than the Bible? Why not? There are a couple apocalyptic books in the Bible. The one is Daniel, and Daniel had prophecies about Babylon. And Babylon was the great empire at the time of Daniel. And Daniel said it would fall. And he said that there would be other empires that would rise and fall, rise and fall. The Babylon of our time is the great empire, and that's the United States. And here in Revelation, John the Revelator, the writer of the book of Revelation, is talking about Babylon and the fall of Babylon. And in our imagination, in our little game, in our little exercise of writing a story, Babylon is the United States. And we begin here in Revelation 18, verse 8. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. Well, that's Babylon. But why her? Why should Babylon be a she if the Babylon is the United States? Well, the United States is very much symbolized by a woman, and that woman is the Statue of Liberty. And the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of the United States because she is emblematic of the rights that are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. And she is emblematic of how the United States was born. We were born from all these different colonies, settled from all these European nations and by slaves, for heaven's sakes, where people spoke different languages. German, not so much German actually, but Dutch and French and Spanish and English. And then there was, the black slaves who were a big part of it. And the people who founded the United States were just regular people. They weren't rich people. There were some rich people who came here. I think the Jamestown was settled, which was failed. Jamestown failed, was settled by gentry from England. Well, those guys didn't know how to plow, and they didn't know how to gather food and to fish and to hunt, and you had to be a worker to survive in those days. It wasn't easy. You were a regular person, but you had to work hard for a living, to scavenge a living. It was not easy. And anyway, that's the Statue of Liberty. And the ideal, and ideals are spiritual energy. The ideal that the Statue of Liberty speaks to is the ideal enshrined in our Constitution, that is equality for everybody, regardless of their social status, under the rule of law. all men are created equal. And the other ideal is freedom. And that means freedom of speech, freedom to say what you want to say, freedom to worship any god you please. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her, for they shall see the smoke of her burning. And this smoke is not, the burning of Los Angeles. This is not it. This is not the burning of South Carolina. That's nothing. That's nothing. This burning is a deterioration that is larger than that. And it's a deterioration very much of the soul of America, of the very, very ideals that American was founded upon. And it happens all in one day. All in one day. Or 2 days in the United States recently, and I'm talking in April 2025, the stock market crashed and lost $6 trillion in valuation. A huge amount of money. All in one day. And the great kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her. So those kings are countries, basically. Countries like Germany and Japan. And I choose those two countries because probably those two countries are the greatest admirers, or have been the greatest admirers of the United States in my lifetime. What happened after World War II was the Marshall Plan. And we rebuilt Japan, and we rebuilt Germany. And in our rebuilding those places, we gave them something of the philosophy that is embodied in the Statue of Liberty, the ideal of equality, the ideal of democracy, the ideal of the rule of law. And the way we did things was copied by them. And we were reliable allies with them for all those years. And here, now, in our apocalypse, this imaginary apocalypse that's not happening, that's just a fantasy, these kings, these countries, shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. And the burning, as I say, is the ideals that they don't see in the United States anymore. The ideals of free trade, the ideals of freedom, the ideals of equality. Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Boom, like that. All of a sudden, things changed. All of a sudden, the assumptions that I grew up with and the way that American life was are gone. We were the consumer society when I grew up. We were envied because we had big cars. We had big houses. Our way of life was something that was amazing to the rest of the world. And there were all kinds of people who wanted a piece of it. And they believed that we had a formula. A lot of countries copied our civil service model because our model of the civil service, our post office, things like that, the IRS, all the government agencies, our model was so amazing that it didn't matter if a Republican was in charge. It didn't matter if a Democrat was in there. The system was dedicated to the Constitution and to the rule of law. And these were servants of the people. The civil servants they were called, servants of the people. That was the ideal. And is that anymore? Is that real thing anymore? And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. We were the consumer society. They can't sell to us anymore. All in one day. The merchants can't sell anything to us in the United States anymore. The mighty dollar used to buy us such cheap goods. That was the formula we had for our consumer society was a formula of dependable agreements, trade agreements among different nations. And now, here, in our little story that we're telling, it's all gone. Those trade agreements are not worth anything anymore. They are null and void. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all tine wood and all manner vessels of ivory and all manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. And of course, electronics and cars and planes and services of all sorts. Nobody's buying from the United States anymore. They're all boycotting. Or they find that they don't want to trade anymore. That's our story. This is our little fantasy, our little American apocalypse that we're making up as I go along reading this. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. So all of a sudden, Babylon, the United States, it doesn't seem like we're the envy of the world anymore. When I was born in the United States, it was the envy of the world. It doesn't seem like we are reliable trading partners anymore. We were a reliable country, a dependable country. Everybody knew where the United States stood. We were leaders in the UN, in all sorts of projects that helped the world be a more united place. We were the only nation that ever used an atomic weapon in war. And still, no other nation has used an atomic weapon in war. And that's the reason why that is because the United States was a stable influence. We could be relied on. People trusted us. They believed us. They knew we had their backs. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand far off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour, so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster, and all the company in ships, and the sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? This great empire that we thought would stand forever, that was so important in the lives of the world, that was the engine of the world economy, all of a sudden it stops and is no more. Ronald Reagan called the United States a shining city on a hill. And in that way, and I believe, I don't know, I didn't go back to his speech, I may be wrong about this paraphrase, but I think what he was talking about, I imagine what he's talking about, was the same thing the Statue of Liberty was talking about, the same thing the Constitution of the United States was talking about, and that is equality. That we stood for equality of human beings, that we stood for democracy, that we stood for law. Our civil servants stood for law. They didn't work for Republicans or Democrats, they worked for both. And we were a shining light in terms of freedom. We had freedom of speech. We had freedom of movement. We had freedom to trade, to buy and sell. And we were a shining city on the hill. That's what Ronald Reagan said. So, all of a sudden, that's no more. The United States is not a shining city on the hill. It was all my life, and it was viewed as that by a very great number of people in nations throughout the world. But now, no more. In our apocalypse, in my imaginary apocalypse, that we're just making up. It's not real. And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. And the voice of the harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. The United States was not just a promoter of free trade and ideas and law and civility. The United States was also an exporter of culture. People admired our culture. The musics of rock and roll and of jazz were, to a large degree, exports from the United States. And they were, interestingly enough, exports from the African American community of the United States to a large degree. A tribute to the multiculturalism that worked in the United States. And I use that in the past tense because, of course, Babylon is gone in our story. It's no more. That's the story we're telling. And no craftsman or whatever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of the millstone shall be heard no more in thee. They're talking about economic recession here, or depression. With trade gone, so is the economy. And the light of a candle shall shine no more in all of thee. And we're talking here about energy and saying that these big houses that the United States was known for, everybody had these big houses. That was the perception. It's not really, it's a stereotype a lot of ways, but there's some truth to the stereotype. And the big cars, the big trucks, that Americans drove. They could no longer afford the energy to run them. All in one day. All in one day. The American apocalypse. That's the story we're telling. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. And this is a statement about demographics. It says that, and there's some truth to this about right now in the United States, that young people are not getting married and having children. At least not the white people. I think the Hispanics were, but we're getting rid of them. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. Thy merchants were the great men of the earth. And these are, I think, would be a good way to say it, are the billionaires. And they didn't all die, okay? They didn't all die. The millionaires and billionaires, they didn't all die, okay? Billionaires don't die. They move. If the country's not working right, they go to a different country. And that's what Elon Musk did. He came here because he thought this was a better opportunity for him. That's what the guy who founded Fox News did too. You know, he came here because the United States was a good opportunity for him. You know, millionaires, they move. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And these sorceries we're talking about here, sorceries, are spiritual energy. And the spiritual energy of the United States, calling it sorcery is kind of making it negative, but we are thinking about it in this story that we're telling as positive. The sorceries of the United States were the sorcery of the Statue of Liberty, the sorcery of the Constitution, the sorcery of the ideal of equality under the law, the sorcery of all men are created equal, the sorcery of, hey, you can worship one God and your neighbor can worship another God and you can still be neighbors and friends. This is the sorcery of the United States. And it's gone. No more. Because this is the apocalypse. And here is the last line of chapter 18 of Revelation. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. And that speaks to something else. It says that when the ideal of America died, when the spiritual energy, which was the idea of America, the great idea of America as the land of equality under the law, the land of freedom, that when that died, freedom of speech died. And people who spoke freely suddenly began to disappear. They were the people talked about in this verse. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. So, our story's done. That's the American apocalypse. And it's just a fantasy. It's not real. I just made it up. And you watched me. And we hope it doesn't happen. So, we'll see you next time.